By most conventional metrics, Champions of Kamigawa wasn't a hit. It was one of Magic's weaker blocks in terms of both popularity and competitive impact. Arriving in the wake of Mirrodin, which nearly snapped the game in half thanks to the infamous affinity mechanic, Kamigawa had its power level intentionally dialed down. The result? A set packed with clunky, underwhelming cards. Its strange, deeply specific flavor also rubbed some people the wrong way. Yet, for a certain segment of the Magic community, it's become a cult classic. Let's start with the most obvious thing: its flavor. Champions of Kamigawa marked one of Magic's first real forays into designing a set built entirely around a specific cultural and mythological template. Beginning with the invasion block, Magic's design philosophy began shifting toward constructing entire sets around core themes. The formula became familiar: choose a particular part of the game's mechanics, then make that element matter across the set. Invasion was all about multicolor decks. Odyssey lived and breathed the graveyard. Onslaught doubled down on tribal synergy, while Mirrodin focused on artifacts. By this point, Bill Rose, one of Magic's lead designers, was starting to feel like the yearly themes were becoming too predictable. An idea struck him. Why did the theme have to be purely mechanical? What if the set took inspiration from a real-world culture? Something with rich texture and flavor, like Arabian Nights had done in Magic's early days. This approach, letting a real-world theme dictate the shape of a set, would later fuel worlds like Theros and Innistrad. But Kamigawa did it first. To prepare, the core design team, Brian Tinsman, Bill Rose, Mike Elliott, and Brady Dommermuth, immersed themselves in Japanese mythology and pop culture. Their biggest influences included the films of Miyazaki, especially Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke, as well as the anime Ninja Scroll and the anime Inuyasha. Once the team settled on Japanese mythology as their muse, the real work began. Creative was tasked with building a world that felt true to the spirit of Japanese culture, while still fitting within Magic's universe. Once they had decided on Kamigawa's identity, the team looked back at existing Magic mechanics that might complement the setting. One design element stood out as a perfect fit: legends. However, there was a snag. The design team had always been hesitant about leaning too heavily on legendary creatures because of the old legend rule. Under that system, only one copy of a given legend could be on the battlefield at a time. If your opponent played theirs first, your copy became a dead card. If legends were too cheap and too powerful, games turned into awkward races. The issue first showed up during Mercadian Masks block, with Lin Civi, Defiant Hero, which became so problematic that it was banned from block constructed. This issue showed up again in 2003 during the Venice Pro Tour semi-finals for Onslaught block constructed. On one side, Billy Jensen. On the other, eventual champion Osip Lebedovich. The match ended with Osip's Akroma Angel of Wrath crashing through for the win, while Jensen sat holding multiple stranded copies of his own Akroma. Not to mention, the legend terminology was a mess. Legend was a creature type with inherent rules baggage, but legendary was a super type used on lands and artifacts. This half-evolved language lingered since the original Legends set. After much debate, a Wizards employee proposed a new legend rule. This tweak solved their concerns and opened the door to making Legends a major set focus. Here's the change that debuted with Champions of Kamigawa. The creature type Legend was retired. From this point, creatures simply carried the legendary super type. Every older creature previously printed as a legend was updated. The new rules said, if 2 or more legendary permanents with the same name are on the battlefield at the same time, both go straight to the graveyard. But crucially, you're no longer locked out from casting your own legend just because your opponent cast theirs first. This rules change had huge ripple effects, and it gave Champions of Kamigawa a mechanical identity rooted in story and legendary battles. Since then, the legend rule has changed again. Each player is now allowed to have 1 copy of a particular legendary permanent on the battlefield. In addition to tweaking the legend rule, Champions applied the keyword vigilance to an ability that had been around for years. It also retired the goofy rules baggage associated with the wall creature type, replacing it with the cleaner keyword defender. With the legend rule amended, Kamigawa would feature the highest concentration of legendary cards Magic had ever seen. Every rare creature in the set was legendary. But that raised a narrative question. Why would so many heroes, leaders, and mythic beings be active all at once? The answer was war. But Magic had done wars before, so how could they craft a conflict that felt distinctly Japanese? The breakthrough came when they looked to Japanese folklore. A huge part of that tradition revolves around the spirit world, and its uneasy relationship with the human realm. What if the war wasn't between kingdoms, but between mortals and the kami, the spirits governing every object, idea, and force in the world? Kamigawa's spirits weren't typical fantasy ghosts or angels. They were bizarre, often unsettling hybrids of thought and instinct, genuinely alien entities, gods in the oldest, most primal sense. Mortals once lived side by side with these spirits, each respecting the other's domain. This is expressed through the set symbol, a torii gate, the traditional Shinto archway found at many shrines. It symbolized the divide between the mortal world and the spiritual one, a perfect fit for the human-kami conflict. Some artifacts from the block carry direct ties to real-world Shinto traditions. Items like the shaku and gohai are actual ritual tools used in ceremonies. Even the shimenawa appear. These were special ropes marking sacred spaces, appearing most visibly in Boseiju, who shelters all. The balance between the mortals and the spirits shattered when Konda, ruler of Aiganjo, committed the ultimate taboo. He stole part of a kami's essence, trapping it in the mortal realm so that he could gain immortality and power and improve the lives of his people. For 20 years, Konda ruled without aging. But the kami didn't take his theft lightly. Spirits became violent, rivers twisted, trees turned against travelers, and nightmare kami attacked villages. What followed became the Kami War. At the center was that which was taken, the stolen spirit fragment hidden deep inside Aiganjo Castle. Its presence poisoned the relationship between the worlds. Okagachi, the great kami of all things, awakening in rage. The plot zeroes in on the lands ruled by Konda. From within Aiganjo Castle, Konda commanded a vast samurai army led by General Takino. Yet even with military might, Konda couldn't halt the kami onslaught. Though Aiganjo remained untouched, Takino's soldiers fell in battle after battle. Among Konda's allies were the Kitsune, a race of foxfolk known for martial discipline and spiritual insight. They served as both clerics and warriors. As the war dragged on, many Kitsune poured their energy into finding answers. Further afield stood Kamitaki Falls, home to Minamo School, where the plane's brightest human wizards trained. High above floated the cities of the Soratami, the moon folk. Reclusive and aloof, the Soratami rarely involved themselves in mortal affairs. Only something like the Kami War could draw them down. Otawara was one of their floating cities, while Oboro was the elegant Soratami court. The Soratami were inspired by the tale of Lady Kaguya. Meanwhile, the Takanuma swamp was a festering, lawless wasteland. Dishonored samurai thrived there, as did the Nezumi, rat folk with a knack for dark magic and thievery. Wizards chose rats as Black's main race because they were a perfect flavor fit, and they helped avoid leaning on undead tropes, which would blur the line between spirits and mortals. The worst of Kamigawa's black creatures were the ogres, loyal to the Oni, malevolent demon kami. Other landmarks in this region include Miren, a haunted well, the Tomb of Urami, a trap laid by the Oni, and Shizo, an ancient battlefield mummified in bog. The Sokenzan Mountains held their own dangerous factions. The mischievous Aki goblins, the warlord Godo's bandits, and Kumano, a lone Yamabushi warrior shaman. Shinka Keep housed ogres loyal to Red Oni. There, Hidetsugu, Shinka's leader, sought to increase his power. The range also includes God's Eye, a tower for spirit world contact, and Untaidake, the tallest peak on Kamigawa. To the south lay Jukai Forest, a wilderness brimming with spiritual significance. This vastness was home to Boseiju, the oldest tree on the plain. The human monks, led by Dosan, had focused on enlightenment and meditation. Now, reluctantly, they turned their skills toward battle. The forest also sheltered the Orochi, snake-like beings who had recently started making contact with humans. Their young warriors began questioning the truce with humanity. The flavor text tied all this together. The writing team resurrected an old magic tradition, sprinkling cards with in-world documents like the history of Kamigawa or observations of the Kami War. These lent weight and gravitas to the storytelling, much like Fallen Empires had done years earlier. In fact, the history of Kamigawa was originally written in tattoos on the body of the shaman Reki. Some quotes hinted at grand battles and cosmic shifts. Others felt intimate, scraps of letters, diary entries, or half-remembered lore. The result was a setting that felt fragmented but rich. The visuals were immersive too. For instance, the art across each cycle of basic lands connected to form panoramic murals. Now let's talk mechanics. First, Splice worked with Arcane, a new spell subtype representing spirit world magic. The mechanic let you graft the effect of one arcane spell onto another. Unfortunately, Arcane ended up being parasitic, meaning it played well with itself, but didn't really interact with cards outside the block. There was also a ton of spirit synergy. Lots of spirit creatures and arcane spells rewarded you for playing more spirits and more arcane spells. Soul Shift leaned into the idea that spirits don't truly die, they just change shape. When a creature with Soul Shift died, you could return a cheaper spirit from your graveyard to your hand. Bushido, Kamigawa's samurai mechanic, gave creatures a temporary stat boost when blocking or blocked. It's not that exciting, but in a format where stats were compressed, these bonuses mattered. Finally, there were the flip cards, Magic's first stab at story-driven character growth in-game. These non-legendary creatures transformed vertically when certain conditions were met, becoming legends. The execution was clunky, but they paved the way for future double-faced designs. Champions also served up several memorable card cycles. You had the Honden Shrines, legendary enchantments offering scaling benefits. These were Magic's first legendary enchantments. The Myojin, 5 towering legendary creatures, each of which came with the equivalent of indestructibility counters and board warping abilities. Legendary lands offered repeatable utility effects. The Spirit Dragons featured potent death triggers. The Zubera rewarded you for stacking multiple copies before sending them to the graveyard. Flash Auras offered combat tricks that lingered as buffs. And the Nap lands were a color-shifted cycle of dual lands that entered tapped. Kamigawa also gave us color-shifted riffs on classic effects. Heartbeat of Spring was a green mana flare, Squelch was a blue bind, and Ghostly Prison was a white propaganda. While Champions of Kamigawa had a reputation for being low-powered compared to the blocks that surrounded it, a few cards did see significant competitive play. For example, Sensei's Divining Top became an instant tournament staple. Its ability to manipulate the top of your library at instant speed and draw when needed made it a cornerstone in control decks. It eventually earned bans in both Extended and Modern, not just because of its raw power, but because it made matches painfully slow to play and watch. Later, when Counterbalance showed up in Cold Snap, Top became a key piece in one of the most infamous soft locks of all time, letting players shuffle the top of their deck to perfectly counter spells on demand. Its other nasty trick was dodging removal by tapping to put itself back on top of its owner's library. Time Stop, one of the splashier rares from the set, holds a bizarre Magic record. It features reminder text that's 14 times longer than its actual rules text. The card's effect, End the Turn, is only 3 words long, but making that rule clear to players required an entire block of dense explanatory text. Glimpse of Nature is a terrifying draw engine when paired with cheap creatures, especially in combo decks. It was eventually banned in Modern for enabling turn 2 and turn 3 kills. For Burn players, Lava Spike has been a reliable staple in every format where it's legal. Mind Blaze is a quirky bit of Magic trivia in its own right. It's the only card in the game that directly references the total number of cards remaining in an opponent's library, and it also stands alone as the only spell that explicitly reveals an entire library as part of its resolution. Though initially overlooked during Kamigawa Standard, Azusa's ability to let you play 2 extra lands per turn made her a staple in any strategy looking to dump lands onto the battlefield at warp speed. This hasty goblin creates infinite loops when paired with cards like Pestamite or Restoration Angel. Through the Breach is still one of the most efficient ways of cheating out giant threats in Modern. This unique land offers a rare and powerful effect, making your spells uncounterable at the cost of some life. Boseiju has become a go-to inclusion in some combo and control-breaking sideboards. Gifts Ungiven was one of the most infamous blue cards of its era. Simple but effective. A 1-mana 2/2 legendary dog. Isamaru is a fantastically clean design where the legendary super type adds flavor while also balancing out its undercosted stats. A pricey legendary land with a price tag driven almost entirely by commander. Minamo is a 1-mana untap effect for any legendary permanent, making it a quiet all-star in decks built around cards like Gaia's Cradle, Serra's Sanctum, or Nykthos. Even outside of land synergies, it can untap your commander for value or protection. It also occasionally shows up in modern merfolk decks. Then there's Brothers Yamazaki, a quirky legend representing a pair of identical twins. It says that if there are exactly two permanents named Brothers Yamazaki on the battlefield, then the legend rule doesn't apply to them. To hammer this home, the card was printed with two different artworks. However, given the way card printing worked at the time, this meant an entire extra card sheet had to be printed just for the alternate artwork. This cost Wizards a lot of money, and Mark Rosewater has since said that giving Brothers Yamazaki two different artworks was one of his most expensive decisions ever. In hindsight, Champions of Kamigawa was a bold but flawed experiment, one that sacrificed raw power for a deeper commitment to theme, flavor, and world building. It didn't hit the mark in every category, but it carved out a distinct space in Magic's history. The block gave us some unforgettable legends, laid the groundwork for entire commander archetypes, and dared to push the boundaries of art style and story. It wasn't the strongest set by modern standards, but it was rich, strange, and full of identity. And for a plane caught between mortals and gods, that feels like a fitting legacy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and consider joining my Patreon. And I'll see you next time.